In my last tutorial, I showed how to make a simple idle clicker game using tweens for progression timers while also showing growth on a grapevine, and also using texture progress bars to represent that growth and be controlled by the tweens, basically. And what I'm going to show this time is 6 or 7 little things that I did, polish and juice, that turned that simple game into something that I think is really cute and satisfying, that I honestly spent like 2 minutes recording footage of to show you how it works because I just couldn't stop playing with it. All right, here we go. All right, so the 7 things that I did to add visual polish and juice to this game were adding sound effects, UI polish in the form of frames, and a text throb indicator when the number changes, highlight when you're hovering over to select a plant, a change in your cursor, made a custom cursor that's animated. It's very cute. I added a particle to show when your score is being counted what you actually did. You took a grape off the plant. And also, in part of adding that grape falling off the plants, I added a little bit more of a game mechanic, just kind of snuck it in there because it made sense, which is that sometimes you get lucky and you get double picks of grapes, which is extremely satisfying. And then finally, I just added a simple background by using a gradient 2D and I think 3 colors. Okay, so here we are, and this is the final scene, as you can see. So first, let's talk about the custom cursor. So the custom cursor here is just a texture rect 2D. There doesn't seem to be anything interesting about it. It has a script attached to it, which is a process function. That's it, and it just updates its position as the global mouse position. So it just follows the mouse around, and it also is set for mouse filter ignore, so it doesn't catch the mouse. So it's just a graphic, a texture that follows your cursor around, and that's it. I think there's also some well, I guess there is a scale change, but that is done in code. So in the master logic for this little game, I actually control this. So I have a cursor controller function here called setCursor, which takes an image and a scale as vector 2, and it will assign the texture of this node to whatever texture set and then set the scale as well. The default's 7.7, and I never changed that. That was just while I was testing out different options. But what you do is whenever we're grabbing a piece of fruit, which is like the start of the interaction when you're clicking the button, we get a signal from the growth button that is called grab fruit, and that is connected now to the grab animation. So it sets the cursor to the grab and then waits and then sets it back to open. And on start, on ready, it also sets it to open. So initially we have an open hand, and then when we're clicking, we grab and then we release. We also set the display server's actual cursor, because this isn't really the cursor. This is just a node that's following around the mouse position. The actual cursor we set to a variable I'm calling empty cursor, which is just a texture, an atlas texture that's just like an empty part of the atlas I used for the other cursors, just so that we had nothing show up. So you can see here, we have our little hand, and when we click, well, it's not clickable, but when we click, it does a little grab. And then next, let's talk about the sound effect you just heard. So in our growth button, which is the scene here of just a single plant that has all those behaviors, we added an audio stream player. I brought in 4 different sound effects that I got from 2 Nerdy Nerds. Thank you, 2 Nerdy Nerds, for letting me your pop sound effects. And I put them in a randomizer so they play it randomly from the selection, but there's no other changes to how they get randomized. It's just which one plays. Added the dB, set it up to 10 because it was a little quiet. So there you can hear it. And I set the polyphony to 5 because this is going to play twice per grape. It's going to play once when it's clicked, and it's going to play once when the grape reaches the top of the screen. I want it to be able to play both of those sounds overlapping. And then if there's 2 grapes that come off a single plant, it's going to play 4 times. 5 was just like 1 extra, just like a little buffer. And then in here for the script logic, I just call on spawn grape, which is what we do when we first click the button. We spawn the grape. We play the audio stream player, so just any sound effect randomly from the randomizer. And then again, when the grape hits the target, which is when we call fruit harvested and increment the counter. So the next thing we did is we added a highlight when you're hovering over the button. So the way that happened is by changing the button that we had behind the texture progress bar from a regular button to a texture button. You may also notice it no longer has a gray aura box like it did before, which I much prefer. With the texture button, we were able to set just the hover texture to an exactly aligned version of the fully grown grape plant, but with a white aura, which is something that I made for this with Krita. Just brought it into my 2D editing software and added a aura layer on top of the image so that it would have a little glow effect. In all other cases, the button is completely invisible, but then this shows up behind the progress bar when it's ready to be clicked and you're hovering on it. Since you're only ever, like hovering only ever has an effect when the button's enabled, this will only show up if the button is enabled, which is only true when the grapes are fully grown. So this is why it works despite being a bit hard-coded with the graphic. I also added a modulate because the original glow was white, and I thought it would look more interesting, but it had a little bit of a color to it. And I played around with colors that I thought complemented the existing color palette of the game. So if we take a look here, once the grapes grow in, you can see the aura that I added. What I'm referring to here. I love these sounds. Anyway, I gotta stop playing it and just show you. All right, so let's see. We went over the sound effects. We went over the custom cursor and the highlight on hover. So let's talk a little bit about the UI changes that I made. So it used to be that the fruit count label was a text label that was a child of a panel container called fruit count panel. And that fruit count panel's theme override was just a clear purple rectangle. So what we have now instead is we changed this to a panel because we did not want to contain the label. That's the first part. We'll talk about the throb animation. So our text does a throb every time the number goes up. The way we do that is we made an adjustment from the original script. And the original script in fruits harvested being changed, we would just assign the fruit label or fruit count, which used to be called fruit count, but I added label at the end. We just set the text of that to a string version of the number of fruits harvested, but now we call the function set new count. And in set new count, we do all the handling of doing the effect in addition to just updating the text. So first, the text is equal to a string of the amount, and then we call this function update UI scaling, which it's a little complicated, so we'll walk through it. So I watched this back in editing and realized I was just approaching this in a really dumb way. So instead of making you watch me go through what I'm about to explain, I'm just going to show you how I changed it. Because it's like you work so long on trying to get it work one way, you keep making adjustments, exceptions to what you were trying to do, that at the end, you basically wrote a really complicated way of doing something simple. And that's kind of what I did here with the UI. So I'm going to explain what I took out, and then you can just ignore the text for the code here for the rest of the video. I don't show it much after this. So what I'm talking about is the fruit count label text. You can see here. Originally, I want it to be on the right-hand side and filling in left. And because of that, I had messed around a lot with how it sat. But ultimately, because of how I wrote it, what I was doing was still just like center aligning it. But doing it with like a variable sized text box and just like doing a bunch of math each time the number changed to resize it. And I just realized that's not necessary because it's center aligned. Like I had it as horizontal alignment right. I changed it to center. And then I set the minimum size to what I actually wanted it to be for the max size. And then I added the trim characters, overrun trim characters. So basically, if we made this a super long number, we would just stop seeing the lower digits, which is, I think, totally fine. Because if anyone plays for that long, they're kind of a jerk anyway. No offense. Like, I'm not going to accommodate for that. That's an insane number. So anyway, and in this way, the minimum size you set actually becomes the max when you have the trim behavior on. And then I set the pivot offset to just the center of this, so it's all set before you start. And then in the code, I literally just commented out references to this function. This function just doesn't need to exist, and I'm just going to take it out of my code, but I wanted to show it here for, like, leave it in for a second to show this. So we're not going to do any UI scaling. We're just going to set new count, call the function with the amount, set the text, and then run the tween. So I'm going to jump ahead now in the cut because I don't think you need to see me walk through all this and then it just doesn't turn out. So, all right, back to UI heart. We create a tween, our beloved tweener. And this time we have two calls. And the way the tweens work is they'll call them sequentially. So first we call scale, and we set it to Throb text scale, which is 1.2. So it goes from 1 to 1.2 in a Throb text period, which is half a second. And then once it finishes, it will call the second tween property, and it will set itself back to a scale of 1 in also half a second. So it's really just increasing from 1 to 1.2 and then decreasing again. All in all takes a second. And we set the transition here specifically to sinusoidal or sine, because we want it to be kind of a smooth curve up instead of just like a linear growth. We want it to like kind of like, wow. Yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but it looks nice, trust me. So with that all good and we're happy, then the other thing is just the panel, which is right here, you can see. And this was all done in settings. So the reason it's a panel and not a panel container is because when we're doing the scaling on the label to get to 1.2, we don't want the panel to grow with it. That's the big thing. We want the panel to stay the same size so that the text feels like it's jumping out of the panel a little bit. That was the effect I was going for here. So this became a panel, and we no longer want this childed to it. And the main reason for not having it childed is because we're going to mess with the scale here. So if you don't recall, the growth button is scaled up to 20 because otherwise it's like 4 pixels wide in the tiny corner of the screen. That wasn't really working. We wanted a big thing. So I scaled up this panel actually to 10. So it's about half the scale of the fruit here, but I think that's okay. I think it looks good together. I was playing around with other options. If it's 20, it's like ridiculous. I don't know. I just didn't think that worked. So 10. Oh, let's just put it back. Yeah, and I just placed it where I liked it, and then I just placed the fruit count label to align with that nicely. And then I changed the theme override. Originally, it was just a style box flat, so a solid color. Now it's a style box texture. And I imported texture that was actually, I set this up myself. It's an atlas texture. So if you go here, I have this HUD, heads up display from the same asset pack that I mentioned in the earlier. I'll include a link to it. It's a tiny RPG, I think. I'll include a link to it. But I just brought this in as a atlas texture resource, and then I selected the coordinates of this UI that I liked, and then I connected it in here. I could have just as easily set this as an atlas texture and defined the position of it in this setting. I wasn't really thinking about that, and I just made the frame before I set this up. And then I adjusted the texture margins. You can see the left one is quite a bit bigger than the others. And that's because there's this interesting thing going on with the shine on the left-hand side that when it scales, I wanted it to stay the same size. I didn't want any stretching going on. I wanted it to tile. And for it to tile nicely, I needed it to not have anything unique where the tile starts. So this is like the cutoff on the left-hand side, and then on the right, it's just right here. And this all tiles. So yeah, basically what we're defining here, texture margins. Left is on the left-hand side, where does the texture stop being unique? And then we get to like the center bit. On the top, where does it stop being unique and be the center bit? And that was at 6. And that's counting the blank space, just to be clear. So it's 6 pixels, but it's including this empty space up here. And then on the right, it's only 5. And then on the bottom, it's 6 as well. And then, yes, set it to tile. So as we get bigger and bigger UI, it's just tiling where it's bigger than the reference graphic. And that's about it. That's how I got this set up. I also, of course, set the filter to nearest for this and other graphics that I set up. So in the custom cursor as well, it's set to filter nearest. Where is that? Here we go, nearest. Also the ordering I forgot to mention on the custom cursor, where Z index is 1 instead of 0, so that it's always on top of everything else in this scene. That's an important detail. All right, so that's it for my custom UI. That was pretty simple. Let's look at the background image, because that one's going to be also very straightforward, and then we'll get into the floating grape, which is a little bit more complicated. So for the background, I just set the whole thing as a texture rectangle for the full size of the screen. And then I picked a gradient texture 2D, just an option here. Down at the bottom, I set the width to 1 because I wanted it left to right to be the same. I just wanted top to bottom it to be unique. The reason I didn't use a gradient texture 1D is because then I can't choose the orientation of the gradient. It would always be left to right. So then I set the starting point here at the top, ending point here at the bottom. Starts off blue, ends green, and in the middle I made it white, and I dragged out, I clicked here like halfway from blue to white, and then I dragged it out so it'd be a bit more solid blue, and did the same thing with the green, because without it, it looks way more white, but I want it to be more of a clear line. So I did that as well. And I think this turned out pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with it. I also reduced the height of this gradient. That's like the number of bits that it takes up to represent all the colors, because I don't think it needs that much fidelity. 18 even is probably overkill, but the default was like 64 or something. And 64. We don't need that much detail. But I just thought it looked nice. The asset pack I have came with like tile sets, and we could have done something more complicated with that and made like a full farm in the background or something, but I don't really like playing with tile sets too much, and I just thought this was an easy way to solve this. All right, let's talk about the picked grape. So the picked grape is also just a texture rectangle, and it's also, I mean, this one's actually an atlas map. So I did the atlas map the same as the growing grapes and just the final product here, right next to the seeds, and went and selected around for just the grape part of it. What else did I do here? I set the filter, of course. So if I can find it, yeah, filter to nearest. So it's pixel. And I had to set the, I guess mouse is pass. So it could technically be clicked on. It just hasn't been an issue, but I'll put it to ignore because I don't really want this to be clicked. I don't want it to block the cursor. That it seems like it wouldn't happen because it moves pretty fast where it's going, but still. And I also scaled it up to 3. I played around with different scales, and I ended on 3 just because I thought it looked best next to these guys. We can take a look at it here. So yeah, it just obviously it's more detailed than the the 8 squares version of it, but that was always the case. But doing less than 3, it looked tiny, and more than 3, it was just enormous. I just thought this was a good in the middle. So then what I do is in the growth button, I reference this packed scene that I made, preload it as pick grape. It's a constant. And then when we're down here and we're calling the spawn grape function after the button's been pressed, we create an instantiation, and we instantiate the scene, call it a grape. We connect the signal hit target, which I will talk about in a second, to here to recognize, okay, the fruit harvested counter should go up. So we're going to emit the signal fruit has been harvested and play a sound effect. And then we add the grape that we made as a child of the owner of the growth button. So the owner of the growth button is actually the whole project scene. So this is a control node, which is ideal. Originally, I had it as a child of the growth button itself, but because this is a margin container, it meant that the picked grape couldn't do its thing. It couldn't move anymore, and the scale got all messed up. So instead, it just gets added as a child of the whole game scene. All right, let's look at picked grape script. When it is added to the scene and it's ready, it sets its position to the mouse position. Otherwise, it would always start in the center of the screen. We don't want that. We want it to start where you clicked. And then we set a target position, which is the top of the screen and the center of the screen. So it's just going up and towards the middle, towards the text is kind of the idea. And every process frame, it's going to slurp its position, which is like a rounded lerp. So it kind of follows a curved path instead of a direct path from its current position to the target, which is the top of the screen. Moving at a particular speed we set as 2.5 here. And it does that until it gets to target position y plus 40 on its position y. And the reason for that is somewhere around 40 down from the top, which is what adding 40 to 0 for the y position is. It's actually 40 down. It's very confusing. I don't like that y goes down. It is one of the reasons I don't like working in 2D. When we get to above the line 40, we consider that having reached the text regardless, because if it were a small area, if we were just saying like it has to hit the text box or something, there's a chance it's going to miss. It's going to take a long time. It's going to kind of break the game. So instead, we're just looking for it go up to the line 40. And when that happens, we emit the hit target signal that we added that we were listening for in the growth button, and we cue freeze. So we delete the picked grape. And here, the target was connected to this function here. So it emits fruit harvested and it plays the pop sound effect. And you might remember in the original, the main project here, we were listening for fruit harvested and connecting it to increment the count for the fruits harvested, which also then sets up the new text. So we have a sound effect, we have new text, and we have the grape disappearing. That's the bulk of it right there. The other change that kind of came with this, when we now are doing it this way with the floating grape, since we wanted the number to not change until the grape hits the top of the screen, I still had some things dependent on when you first click the button. So here, when you, oh, sorry, not here. here on button pressed, we first call grab fruit emit. And so that's the other thing in the main project we were listening for, grab fruit. And at that point, we do the grab animation with the cursor. So that's kind of how it all comes together. That's the logic there. It took me, I would say, 2.5 hours to set this up this morning. And a lot of that time was just Googling for a few issues I ran into and then getting it fixed, trying a few different options for how to solve these problems. The thing with the cursors was like a little tricky, and I originally brought the HUD into Krita, which ended up being a waste of time. I didn't need to do that because I just needed an atlas texture to save it as a unique resource. So here you can see I have the atlas texture of just the hand, and I'm just defining the region of the grabbed hand. But I had like PNGs of these before. I didn't need to do any of that. So that was a waste of time. Also figuring out, so originally I went into the project settings and I set the cursor this way. And I was going to just change the image between the two, kind of like how I set the empty here, the display server as an empty cursor. The reason I didn't do that is because you can't set the scale. So here I set the scale as 7 and 7, and that is so important because otherwise the cursor is so teeny tiny. It's ridiculously small. Like I could show you if I do this, set the project settings, and let's just do the open hand. Oh, I can't even. It needs to be a PNG, so I can't even show you anymore. But it was tiny. I'll see if I can find some footage of it and show it on the screen. Oh my gosh, it's tiny. Oh no, that's so small. Okay. With this, we have our grapes still growing just like they did before. But now when they're done, they highlight if you hover over them. Our little gloved hand grasps them, and then a grape flies up into the sky in a nice rounded pattern. You can see the roundness there. Here as well, more round. And when it reaches the text, the number goes up and it does a little bounce. And I'm so enjoying it. The doubles, once I set up the logic where the grape controlled the number going up, I was like, well, it would be so easy to then just have 2 grapes go up sometimes, and that would be really satisfying, like a crit of harvesting grapes. Like, oh, you critted it, so you got double, you know. So then, yeah, what I did actually, I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So the double grape here in the growth button, basically, so we emit the grab fruit, so we do the grasp animation, and we do the initial sound effect for grow fruit, which I think, or no, it's for spawn grape, never mind. So we do the grasp animation with this. We spawn our first grape, which sends it off. Then we do a probability draw. So we do random number in the range of 0 to 100. And if that number is less than the spawn probability, then it passed. So if the spawn probability is 30 and we're picking a number between 0 and 100, if we only want 30%, then 30% of 100 would be like 0 to 30, not 30 to 70. So we want to make sure it's less than. That's the idea there. So if that happens, we call spawn grape again, but now we're passing in the delay. And the reason for the delay is because if we didn't, they would spawn almost instantaneously in the same process frame. So they would be on the exact same position. You wouldn't see the second one. You might hear it, but you would not see it. You probably wouldn't even hear it. So adding in this extra little delay meant that they kind of have like this cute following pattern, like, oh, a second one came up. So adding the delay there gives a little offset on them, which is cute. And then we just add the second grape and it works and it's adorable. I'm so happy with this cute little project and all this little juice that I've added to make it nicer. And I have more ideas for how to add. Oh, there they go. Little double grapes. I have ideas for how to make more juice for this cute little game about harvesting grapes in the future. But that's all I got for now. That was 7 things. I hope it was interesting. Just to summarize, we added sound effects. We added a UI frame and UI text throbbing. We added a custom cursor that is animated. We added a highlight on our button. We added a particle and a chance for a double, which is like extending the gameplay, not even just juice and polish, but like extended gameplay that just emerged from adding this juice. And we added the beautiful gradient background. Beautiful. I might be overselling it, but I'm really pleased with it because the previous, it was just solid gray. It was like not even a set background. It was just like the default nothing Godot gives you. So overall, I like just can't even stop clicking these. They're so fun. Overall, I would say it's been a good improvement. All right. I hope that was helpful. If you're new here, I have a Discord and I stream on Saturdays and Sundays doing my own game development. So you are welcome to find me there. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. If you have something else you'd like to see me do a video on, please let me know. I'm happy to do more and explore more game dev topics and help people with these little tutorials. So yeah, thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye.